Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical like mine. It can be
do anything you put your mind to.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
What seems impossible can be done by you.
Chris Singleton is a speaker, a best-selling author. His story is amazing.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you.
And we're going to talk about his journey from paralysis to purpose and how he's making an impact in the world today.
And so forgiveness for me is like, okay, it's going to allow me to move forward in my life by forgiving this person, even if they say, hey, I don't receive it. You know, and I think that's why it's more important for me, the person that's forgiving, rather than the other person. And so the reward for me is not constantly thinking about how my mother was taken away every single day, right? The reward for me is now looking at a young white male and not saying, hey, he's probably just like the person that took my mom away, right? Because if you don't forgive, in some instances, you associate everybody with one experience you had.
Got so much to give, a lot of life to live, you must go from paralysis to purpose.
Get your pen and paper out.
Yeah.
I'm taking notes.
Paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Let me just stop and thank you for downloading this podcast, leaving a 5-star review, because it's going to be a good one, and also sharing this with some of your friends. You know, I say this every time. I love the job that I do with this podcast because I get to speak with some of the most inspiring and intriguing people in the world. And today is no exception. Chris Singleton is a speaker. He is a best-selling author. His story is amazing. He shares his stories with young and old alike, schools, businesses, and it's just an honor to have him today. And we're going to talk about his journey from paralysis to purpose and how he's making an impact in the world today. So, Chris, I want to thank you for coming and welcome to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation we're about to have for sure.
Well, hey, let's just get started. For the listeners who don't know, you actually lost both your parents at a young age. The loss of your mom is one that the entire world was made aware of because of a shooting that took place in a church back in 2015. Could you just walk us through that situation? And from there, you birthed a movement. I call it a movement, that love is stronger than hate. And can you just talk about that situation? And then when you talk about that, I want to talk about forgiveness and what that means and how that is important on everyone's journey from a difficult place to a place of purpose.
I call it the unthinkable, what happened to me, right? Because never in a million years you think your mom would be murdered while she's praying in church. But June 17, 2015 was that day for me. There was a guy who was a white supremacist, wanted to start a race war in this country. And his goal was to, commit these murders inside of a historically Black church. And this would cause such an uproar that we'd have a race war throughout the United States. That was his mission. That was his goal and his plan. And I'm grateful to God that didn't play out. So he actually committed the murders. He took 9 lives that night. One of them being my mom, 45, single mother of 3, extremely hardworking, children's church pastor, educator, all that in a bag of chips, man. She was everything. But he took my mom away. And like you said, forgiveness for me was probably the thing that helped me move forward in my life so much. It's never easy to get through something like that, right? You lose a breadwinner for your family. You lose somebody that you love dearly. But I learned so much from it. And forgiveness for me has allowed me to move forward.
Well, let's talk about how you came to that, because it's easy to say, but it's difficult to do and to continue to live it, because the memory of your mom, I'm sure, is fresh in your mind on a daily basis. How were you able to get to the point of forgiveness? And there are many people who probably think that when you forgive someone, you're not holding someone accountable for their actions. Can you talk about the relationship between forgiveness and accountability?
Yeah, so I'd say forgiveness, number one for me was almost instantaneous. Then this is why I say it was placed on my heart. because in most cases, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be a journey. It's going to be, hey, I'll have to make a decision to forgive, right? I like to tell people to say it orally. Say, I forgive this person for doing this to me. And then I forgive them for doing that because it's going to allow me to do X, Y, and Z, right? Because we have to flip forgiveness back towards us and how it's going to benefit us and not the other person if we truly want to move forward, right? Because if there's no reward on the other side of forgiveness, then we won't truly want to do it in our hearts. And so if we figure out, what that reward is, then the process and the journey can begin. And like you mentioned, accountability for me, man, I don't, my mother's killer got the death penalty. Now, did I want him to get the death penalty? I didn't. But would I ever want to see him walking on the streets ever again? Absolutely not. Right. That's not what it is at all. So forgiveness for me, I forgave him. Hopefully he can get right with, our creator. But I don't ever want to see him walking out on the streets in potential that this could happen again, to be honest with you.
Wow. So, and that's great because that's real talk. I mean, that's reality. Yeah. That's not, I forgive you and I'm just going to live my life and, hey, hope you have a great life. It's just,
that's a fairy tale. No, that's a fairy tale. Like I'm intentional when I say like, I move forward in my life. I don't move on. I actually made a post about this recently. Because I think it's two different things. When people say they move on from something, that means they're insinuating that they don't think about it anymore, right? I've moved on from it. I don't think about it anymore. It doesn't affect me anymore. Whereas I'm moving forward, meaning like I still think about this daily, but now moving forward, I use it to fuel me in my mission, in my purpose, instead of saying I move on like I don't care about it anymore. Absolutely not. I do care.
I love that distinction of moving forward versus moving on. I was 15 years old when I had a spinal aneurysm and they put me in a wheelchair, and I had to move forward from that. I mean, I have to deal daily with all of the challenges of being in a wheelchair, but I couldn't stay in the place of pain. I had to move in order to have a successful life. And that is a great distinction. When you came to grips with this, the ability to forgive, you talked about there being a reward on the other side of forgiveness. I want to unwrap that a little bit because I do think that, as you said, forgiveness is as much about you as it is about the person you're forgiving. But I want to go back to your statement about there's a reward on the other side of forgiveness. Can you just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. And David, I'd be honest, I even think it's more rewarding for the person that is forgiving rather than for the person that's, receiving the forgiveness. Only because in some cases I can forgive somebody and they can still never say sorry, right? They can still say, hey, you've forgiven me, but I don't care. I'd do it again. Right. Now, that's not what happened in my case. I think my mother's killer said he wasn't sorry for what he did, but he doesn't know if he could ever do it again, is his words. But I think about it like salvation, like the gift of our creator, reaching out his hand. Like, I don't think everybody will reach their hand out to receive it. Right. But the gift has still been given. And so forgiveness for me is like, OK, it's going to allow me to move forward in my life by forgiving this person, even if they say, hey, I don't receive it, and I think that's why it's more important for me, the person that's forgiving rather than the other person. And so the reward for me is not constantly thinking about how my mother was taken away every single day. Right. The reward for me is now looking at a young white male and not saying, hey, he's probably just like the person that took my mom away. Right. Because if you don't forgive, in some instances, you associate everybody with one experience you had.
Wow. Let's stay right at this point, because that is the foundation of prejudice and racism and other injustices, the inability to deal with each person on an individual basis. Did that take you some time? But, it sounds like, I don't know. Your parents seem to have done a remarkable job with instilling some values in you so that when this tragedy hit, you had something to pull on. How did you not hate? I mean, was there a time where you had some animosity or wanted to punch anyone or anything, or how did that happen?
Well, I do remember, one time after my mom was taken away, I had a bad baseball game because baseball was my, out. That was where I got my energy out, right? The weight room and baseball. That's what I did. And I remember getting out one time and I punched went to the bathroom afterwards and I punched, the blow dryer or the dryer that dries your hands, right? And I punched it. And I chipped like 2 bones in my wrist from doing that, right? I couldn't tell anybody that I did that, right? I couldn't tell them what happened.
Right.
But I remember that instance, right? Me having all that anger and just that emotions, and I did that and hurt myself. And so now am I still upset about what happened? I will be upset every single day for the rest of my life, right? I will be upset. But I don't think anger is going to change anything for me right now. Now, I also think that I was so overwhelmed with the responsibility of taking care of my brother and sister that I didn't even give anger a chance to seep in. It was just like, what do I do now? But as time went on, instead of letting that anger get to me, I flipped it and said, I'm so upset. Now I want to see what I can do to make sustainable change.
Okay. So in addition to losing your mom, you had already lost your dad, and now you became the caretaker, for lack of a better word, of your family. And that's sometimes how things happen. And that responsibility kicks in, and life places a demand on you to move forward if you're going to have success. And you did have to move forward because you had to be responsible now for helping your siblings grow. When did you know that part of your purpose now was to become a speaker and try to impact the lives of people literally around the world? When did you get that?
Yeah, man, I was actually, I did an E60 piece, an ESPN documentary on me and my story and forgiveness and the words love is stronger than hate. So we did a documentary on that with ESPN. After it was shared, everybody would ask me to speak. Hey, Chris, we want you to speak to our youth group. We want you to speak to our middle school, our travel program or whatever. And I said no at first. That's not what I do. I'm just trying to make it to the big leagues, right? Trying to get drafted. And that's all I cared about at the time. But I remember watching a video of a guy. His name is Inky Johnson. And he's become one of my friends, one of my mentors in this space. And I watched one of his videos. And after that video, I sent it to all my teammates at the time. And I said to myself, man, if I can make somebody feel how this guy just made me feel through this video, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And I started saying yes to these engagements. And that's how things started for me.
Wow. Inky Johnson. Bucket list. That's what I'm saying. He's on my bucket list. I've been trying to get a hold of you, Inky. We want you on the podcast, so let's get it done.
Great guy.
Oh, look, the best. I mean, at what he does. And you talk about a story from paralysis to purpose. Amazing. Yeah. So at first you weren't interested in doing that, and you found your way to making that happen. And then you wrote a book. Your first book was called Different, and it was dedicated to your mom. And talk a little bit about that, because that became a bestseller. When did you think about writing a book?
You know what, man? I never thought about writing a book before. People would say, hey, Chris, you're speaking, you need to write a book. And I'm like, man, that's not what I do, right? That's just not me. Like, I feel like there's authors that speak, and then there's speakers that, have books just because that's part of what we do, but right. I was more so thinking man, I love to speak. I love to share, bring people together with my words, but I'm not the best writer, man. And I actually wrote children's books. So this story, Different, a story about loving your neighbor. I always would speak to middle schools, high schools, colleges, corporations, but I never would feel safe speaking to an elementary school, because I would say, here's a very, very sad story. Who am I to tell these kids how my mom was taken away and the reason why she was taken away and take away their innocence? I think that'd be an incredibly selfish thing for me to do. And so I said, how can I still get this message across, but not share all the gory details? And just celebrating kids that are different than one another is a way that I can get that same message of unity across that I share throughout all the different age groups that I share with. And so the book came out, man. And to be honest, I self-published a book. So if people are familiar with publishing and, self-publishing, like I didn't have this huge, publishing company behind me. I didn't know what I was doing. I asked a million people a million questions, and got connected with the right people, ended up releasing the book. And the Obama Foundation, man, they shouted the book out, and I got a ton of traction from there. Different celebrities were shouting it out. And then I think mainly, man, people were always asking me, Chris, is there anything I can do for you? And people say that all the time. And I'm just like, no, I'm good. But finally, when my book came out, man, I was saying, absolutely, support this book, reshare it, buy a couple for your grandkids, for your kids. And they did that. And it was a snowball effect.
I think that's fantastic how you leveraged that and built relationships. We've already started talking about this, and I always like to share this in the podcast. There are 3 pillars that I like to discuss about going from paralysis to purpose, and their perspective, perseverance, and partnerships. And we're gonna continue to talk on those. You've already addressed some of the areas of partnerships, and clearly your perseverance is real clear. Can you just talk a little bit about where we are as a country in terms of unity and coming together?
Yeah, man, I think we definitely have some work to do. And I think I want to state this before I share what's next, right? I think you can be, the biggest, patriot, but still think we have stuff to work on in our country, right? And I think some people get those things misconstrued, like, hey, if you criticize, then you can't love what you're criticizing. I absolutely love our country. Like, I feel like, this is one place in the world where you can make it from nothing. Not too many countries allow that to happen.
Before you continue, I just want you to know, I literally have written down here a question for you about, is it possible to be critical about something you support or someone you support? And you just answered that question, because people think that I love America. Let me tell you right now, I am not planning on going anywhere. I've been out of the country, and whenever I come back, look, this is the spot.
No doubt.
I don't care what anybody says, but I still think there's things that we can do better. It's kind of like being on a team. You've played baseball. I coached basketball for 30 years and had a bunch of teams and stuff. And as good as we were, sometimes we needed to improve on things, because if we didn't, we couldn't keep winning. So I just think that I wanted to make sure that our listeners understood and heard what you just said, because there's a way to be critical and supportive. There's a way to be critical and not be supportive. And what you're talking about is positive criticism in the midst of love and concern for a country or people that you love. I
love that sports analogy, because I always say, like, if you're a Knicks fan, like you can talk bad about your team, right? You got to say, hey, man, we got to put this together, put that together. Like, we got to get these draft picks in line. Like, we got to win. We're the Knicks, right? We're the Knicks. But if somebody else, a Laker fan start talking about the Knicks, you're like, hold up. Let me do that. This is my team. This is my squad. So, that's kind of how I see it as well. We're cheering for this team, but we know we got some things to work on. And unfortunately, man, I think right now division has brought people together more so than unity. And I'll give you an example of what this means. So, like, I feel like people are coming together to talk bad about something else more than anything. So it's like, hey, let's go back to sports again. So let's say I'm a Lakers fan, right? Right. And instead of me cheering for the Lakers, I think the Lakers fan, the Pistons fans, the Hawks fans, we don't like the Knicks so much that we all going to team up and talk about the Knicks instead of talking about our own teams. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I've seen. People are just coming together just to create division. And I'm like, man.
So they're coming together to be divisive. That's crazy.
Yes.
Oh, and let me just put this in here. I live in Milwaukee. You better give some love to the Milwaukee Bucks, world champions.
I love the Bucks, man. You know what I love? Well, number one, Chris Middleton is from Charleston, South Carolina, and I worked his basketball camp a couple years ago. So I'm a huge fan of him, and I support him. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, man. I've got hope, because for the first time, I think people that don't look like me, as I'm a young Black man, people that don't look like me are thinking for the first time, like, man, what would it be like if I was Chris? Or, I think there's empathy starting to happen, but unfortunately people are, they lock in on the negative more than any time before. I feel like, we see these feel good stories. I was watching one today, this military veteran. I think he was in a retirement community with his wife, and he saw this young lady who's now serving the military, who wrote him a thank you letter like 30 years ago. And he found her. He's like, there's no way this is you. And she's like, yeah, this is me. Gave him back the letter that he wrote her. And they started crying together and just smiling. She's like, you inspired me to go to the military. Like, fantastic story, man. And I'm like, why isn't this everywhere? This is the coolest thing I've seen in years. And guess what? It was an older white gentleman and a young Black lady who's now serving our country. And I'm like, my gosh, this should be front page news. Like, everybody would love this story, but it doesn't sell as much. You know, it sells as much as if they're not liking each other, right? If they're, talking bad, cursing one another out on social media, that will sell, unfortunately, instead of the story that makes us smile and cry a happy tear. You
recently had a situation here in the Midwest. You were going to speak somewhere, and there was a parent that was concerned about you coming to speak. Could you share just that story, and then we'll take a quick break after that, and then come back and about that situation and how you resolve that, because I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, so I'm not a person that just talks to talk, right? I want to do what I'm speaking about. You know what I mean? So in this instance, I was going to a school district in the Midwest, and I'm coming there, and somebody I know sends me a screenshot of his Facebook group. And they're saying, oh, Chris Singleton shouldn't be coming. He shouldn't be talking about mental health with our kids. That's not his place. He shouldn't be talking about unity. They were saying, hey, it's funny how somebody that lost his mom is going to come in, or lost his mom to racism, is going to talk about racism in our school. He's going to make all the white kids feel bad. And she, the lady was going on and on and on. And finally, what I did was I said, you know what? Let me reach out to this lady. She doesn't know my heart. She doesn't know what my mission is. And so I reached out to her. And automatically the walls went up. No, of course I'm not doing this. You're just another celebrity trying to make money off our kids, just giving me every reason in the book, right? And I said, how about this? How about I either take you to breakfast, lunch, or dinner, coffee on me? I got a day before I speak to the school. I'd love to be able to hang out with you and share with you my heart. I saw the walls start to come down a little bit. And she said, okay, well, let's do lunch. And I said, okay, how about this place? And she said, no, not that place. We can go here. I told my wife that. My wife's like, you sure you're going now? You might be walking into something, And I said, no, baby, this is me, walking the walk, not just talking. And so I met with her. First, the approach was I let her know, hey, I'm here to learn from you. I want to learn about your perspective of why you think I shouldn't be here and share this with the kids. And so she voiced her opinion, and I immediately shared my heart and what I was there for the kids for. And there were some things we disagreed about. We disagreed on the point that she didn't think mental health or issues of race should be taught in our school. They should be taught at home. And I said, that is a great statement, but unfortunately, not everybody has parents that pour into them and tell them these things that they should know. If we want the school to discipline the kids if they're cursing one another out, right? That wouldn't happen. So we also don't want racism to be happening in our schools. So when they bring in somebody like me, that's what we're basically doing. Just to talk about these things and make sure every kid feels celebrated. And so we talked about my mission, my heart. And she said, you know what, Chris, I am going to send my kids to school on Friday to hear you speak. She said, I see your character now. And I see that you're genuine with this. Like, you're genuine. I showed her hundreds of screenshots of kids pouring their heart out to me after I got done speaking. Mm-hmm. And she saw how genuine I am. And she said, you know what, I'm sending my kids to school. And I said, okay, well, you come with me as well. Right, I want you to hear me. And so she ended up coming there, absolutely loved my presentation. And we took a picture together. We smiled together. And overall, man, she learned where my heart was. I learned what her concerns were, and they were real. And we came together, man. It was a great conversation. The walls had to come down initially, like I said. And then it was great. It was a teaching moment, learning moment, and it worked out for the best.
And so this is a great place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, we can tackle more about conversations and building relationships and talk about your new book that says Your Life Matters. We'll be right back after this short break.
Before we return to part 2 of Moving Forward, the Chris Singleton story, let me remind you that David's own story is now available as an audiobook, and it's narrated by David himself. Here's a sample from Chapter 9, entitled Persistence, where David recalls starting graduate school at Duke University and trying to meet legendary men's basketball coach Mike Krzyzewski. He had visited Coach K's office twice already, only to be told Coach was on vacation. Then, days before the start of fall semester, David made one more attempt. That's when an unexpected encounter gave him the break he was hoping for.
I opened the office door to leave, and, hey, aren't you the guy from Wisconsin? Well, I was from Wisconsin, but was I that guy from Wisconsin? I stopped in my tracks and spun around to see who had said it. It looked like someone who played for Duke. Yes, I'm from Wisconsin. And who are you? Tony Lang. I remember seeing you down in St. Petersburg, Florida, with your AAU team from Wisconsin. You guys had Damon Key on your team, right? Yeah, I said, trying to jog my memory back to that tournament. We played so many games in so many cities, I remembered we opened against Chris Webber's AAU team in St. Petersburg, but that was about it. Well, I love the way you worked with your guys. Are you going to help us out this year? I nearly jumped out of my seat, and I said, I sure hope so. Here's Tony Lang saying this outside of Coach K's office in front of people who could help me meet him. I had never received a timelier and more satisfying recommendation in my life. It came from a total stranger who simply noticed me going about my business. It was a foot in the door, but that didn't mean I was in. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the Fuqua School of Business to set up my email account and get better acquainted with WordPerfect and Microsoft Excel. As I made my way to the elevator, I spotted none other than Coach Tommy Amaker, the Duke point guard from 1983 to 1987. I met him at the bottom of the stairs and introduced myself, explained my failed attempts at meeting Coach K, and offered my help in whatever capacity the team needed. Tommy asked if I had a resume or anything he could give Coach K on my behalf. I rifled through my briefcase and found at the bottom of it a newspaper article from the Tampa Tribune written by Bob Chick. Frailty of life influences cooks positive different. Ironically enough, Chick published it when the AAU tournament in St. Petersburg was going on. Yes, the very same tournament Tony Lang had referenced earlier that day in the men's basketball offices. Destiny was on my side once again.
That's David Cooks narrating his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose. Get yourself a copy and find out how David's persistence in trying to meet Coach K led to one of the most important opportunities of his life. Getting Undressed is now available to purchase wherever audiobooks are sold. Now, let's get back to part 2 of David's conversation with Chris Singleton.
Welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast with our fantastic guest, Chris Singleton. Chris, right before the break, you shared the story about the conversation you had with a parent that had some concerns about your presentation and the appropriateness of it for her daughter, or her child, should I say. Can we talk just a moment about the importance of conversation and in dealing with reconciliation and unity, and the relationship that the cancel culture can have on conversation?
I think the cancel culture has been huge over the last couple of years. And I'm all for holding people accountable. But I think sometimes this is the way I break it down. There's really only 2 reasons you believe what you believe, right? You've either experienced something or you've been taught it. It's really only 2 reasons, right? You've been taught it from somewhere, or you experienced something to make you believe what you believe. And some people aren't as fortunate as others to be taught the right thing. And so if I go into a circumstance or situation and I ask one of my buddies, I say, hey, man, you know, what does keeping kosher mean, right? You can't have a cheeseburger. Like, I don't know, right? But how silly would it be if I went on live television, not knowing anything, and just talked about people that are Jewish should be eating cheeseburgers? Like, because I don't know, because I haven't experienced it or haven't been taught it. And so if we don't experience it or be taught it, we may say the wrong thing and we can instantly be canceled and we're not able to learn. Now, I always say, like, if we have relationships with people, if I can go to my buddy Kyle and ask him what keeping kosher means and ask him how many people are, you know, unorthodox Jews versus people that are, you know, that follow everything, maybe he can break it down to me, but I have a relationship there. So I won't get canceled when I say something silly like, why can't they have a cheeseburger to Kyle? But if you don't have a relationship with people, that's where you get canceled. And that's where there's no growth that happens, because then I'm saying, I don't want to say anything, man. I'm scared to say anything, right? I'm scared to ask about a hijab because I don't know if I say the wrong thing that people are going to cancel me. But if you have relationships with people, that's where we grow.
Wow. So the fact, so relationship kind of trumps error, so to speak. It allows for you to grow and learn and change, because you've talked about the difference between a lived experience, which is something that you and I speak on when we go speaking, versus something that we've been taught. The marriage of the two sounds like the solution. If we can combine if we will listen to the lived experience of the person speaking, and can combine that with something that we're taught, or change what we're taught, then we're starting to talk about changing the narrative, which is something that you are trying to do. Your latest children's book is called Your Life Matters. And I found it just a very interesting book because there are some people who would say that Chris Singleton is a great guy, but what does he do for the Black community? That he spends most of his time at white schools or with white people, which I think is just as erroneous as it possibly could be. But can we address, let's talk about your book first and why you wrote this book. And then let's talk about the perception that people can have about what you do.
Yeah, man, I'll get into the latter first. So the only time I experience when that happens is when people say to me, Chris, you forgave your mother's killer. Now you let white people off the hook by doing that, man. And I'm like, man, you know what? If he was roaming around and didn't get the death penalty, I could totally understand where you're coming from. But with me, I say, number one, I'm doing the work. It's not like I forgave my mother's killer. Now I'm on the sidelines and say, hey, I don't do anything else. It's just, hey, I forgave him. Now I'm done. No, I do the work, and I'm teaching people, especially young white people, to not automatically judge somebody that looks like me. Now, in turn, I'm hopeful that the CEO that hasn't hired Jerome because his name is Jerome realizes, hey, I've been having these unconscious biases for years and not hiring Jose because I'm asking in the back of my head, hey, I wonder if Jose speaks English. No, I'm serving everybody. And this book is a clear testament to how I'm not just trying to serve, little white kids or whatever it may be, or white people. This book was literally written for little Black boys and little Black girls. And it's called Your Life Matters because last year in 2020, I remember seeing a video of a kid who was playing basketball out in front of his yard, his little Black kid, and there was a cop car that drove by. He immediately got his basketball and hid behind the car. He hid behind the car so the cop wouldn't see him. Mm-hmm. And in his mind, I think he was terrified just of police in general. And I'm thinking, man, that kid needs to know how much he means to the world. Like how much he matters, right? How much he so many great things he could do in the world, right? And don't be scared and thinking people don't care about you because you matter. And that was the thought process. And for me, I think there's power in representation. And so when I wrote this story, Your Life Matters, I have different Black heroes that are telling our main character, little Black girl, hey, your eyes matter, your words matter, your voice matters, your courage matters. Have people like Maya Angelou, President Barack Obama saying how much, they matter. Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, just people who I call them Black heroes. Like it's probably not the politically correct term, but I just call them Black heroes. And I got them throughout the story just saying, man, you mean so much to the world. You matter. And it's been great. It's been a good response thus far.
Can you just kind of spend a moment to talk about being Black and what that means and what it doesn't mean? And I guess what I'm getting at a little bit is that we are a diverse people in and of ourselves as well, that we have conservatives, liberals, everything in there. How can we come together and celebrate all of that?
Yeah, well, number one, I feel like you can never put anybody from a race into just a box, right? So when I say that, I've spoken to lawyers before, and there's a Black lady that's one of the lawyers says, "Hey, Chris, I don't feel like I need to, speak to all the white people about Black History Month. That's not me, right? I never grew up this way or that way. I didn't want for anything, so they're asking me questions I don't know." And so sometimes we automatically look at a demographic of people as diverse as they are, and we automatically say, oh, probably grew up with a single mother, probably grew up in the projects or this, that, and the third. In actuality, there's so many people that had two parents that went to college like me, right? I never missed a meal before. And so I never want to specifically put people into one box, but my sister says, and my sister's into this big astrology thing is, she's always asking what's your, what sign are you, right? You Cancer, right. When your birthday is, right? And so right. There's some people, it's just diverse, man. My sister's asking if you're a Capricorn and she can automatically read you, how you act and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I just think you never can put people into one box, there's different shades, sizes, colors. And when you're able to celebrate everybody, especially, I think about Black women, Afro-Latina, even my wife, my wife says, hey, don't leave me out of there, Playboy. You know what I'm saying? Don't leave me out. There's slavery in Brazil. Don't leave our stuff out. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there's just diverse groups that we should be selling within the Black community.
Wow. So you were talking about your wife made a great statement on defining what inclusion really means. Because I tell people, and I was a diversity in the diversity space for almost 20 years, that inclusion that is exclusive is selection. And it's not inclusivity, because if we're going to be inclusive, then we need to include everybody, period. Yeah. And until you're able to sit with something that you might disagree with or someone that you don't see eye to eye with and still move forward, as you said earlier, you have not come to understand what diversity is really all about. What would you say is has been the greatest challenge that you've had in doing this work?
I'd say the greatest challenge would be how people have thought the same way for decades. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, right, when I speak to, a Fortune 50 company or to a, group of executives that have 35 years of experience in something, some people get set in their ways. They could say, I've seen this happen for years this way. Why do I need this? Even though statistics show them that they do. They'll say, I've been doing just fine without it. You think about technology, like my great grandfather, before he passed away, he was like, well, I don't need a cell phone. You can just, call the house. If I ain't home, just wait till I get back. And it's like, man, we have to, if we're not growing with the times, man, we're going to get left behind. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen with companies. They've dropped the ball on diversity. And, when things happen, such as, last year, they're caught twiddling their thumbs. They don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And people leave their companies and they don't feel safe in those environments. So, I think you have to be proactive, but people being taught the same thing for decades and having a bunch of experience and thinking they don't need anything else to do their jobs is the hardest thing that I see in my work.
Wow. So success can actually hinder progress sometime.
Of course, man, especially if you've been uber successful with doing things one way, mm-hmm. and that one way isn't the best way right now. Oh man, that's how businesses don't change. They don't adapt, they go under.
How would you respond to someone that would say, well, Chris, you're not like the other people that I think about when I see you. You're different than them. How do you address that, and how do you bring all of the people along with you as you give your presentations? Because I know that I'm in a wheelchair and I'm a Black guy, and I probably don't check many of the stereotypes that people have about me and about people who they think are like me. How do you deal with that?
And what's funny, man? I've actually heard certain things like that. Some people will make a comment under their breath like that, and I have to stop them. And I say, well, you know what, man? I'm privileged. My mother would tell me, hey, don't say that word that way. You better say it the right way, boy. She slapped me upside the back of the head. You know what I'm saying? Right? I had parents that poured into me. Not everybody had that, right? And I remind them of my privilege, and I remind them of theirs as well, right? And just making that statement. Did the little kid that grew up in the projects choose the fact that, he grew up in the projects his whole life and went to high school and was probably couldn't go to college unless he had every single scholarship in the book. Like, did he choose those circumstances? Absolutely not. And so when I look at people, I don't judge them based on where they are, because sometimes I have to think about, well, what's their story of how they got there? Maybe they weren't poured into, they didn't get read to as a kid. Even with the children's books that I write, they're the third grade reading level. And I go to serve in some Title I schools here in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'll see some 6th and 7th graders that are struggling with these books, right? They didn't have a mom or dad that was reading to them as a kid. Is it their fault? Absolutely not. But I don't think that's going to hinder them forever. But we do need to address that, hey, they're behind the 8 ball a little bit. And it's not because of them. It's because of how they were raised. So wow. I never want to say, I'm this or I'm that, because at the end of the day, I'm privileged to be where I am. And whoever's asking me that question or making that statement probably doesn't realize the privilege that they have as well.
Now, when I talk to people about privilege, I can take race and everything out of it. And I talk about something I call walking privilege, because I have walked and I have not walked. And so I get both of them. And there are privileges that come with walking that you're not even aware of because you don't have to use a wheelchair. And once we break it down on that level, people begin to understand, oh, that's privilege. I'm like, it is.
That's good.
And I'm not going to hold it against you because you're walking and I'm not, because that's not how this works, because then we won't get an understanding. So I thought that was fantastic that you even identified yourself as someone who had privilege within the community. And it does make a difference.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Man, we've talked about so many things. This has been a great conversation. What I want to do is something I do with some of our guests. And I'm going to mention the 3 words we talked about earlier. And I want you to tell me what comes to mind when you hear these words. Perspective.
Yeah, man. So I think, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but this is a quote from, Chuck Swindoll that I use every day of my life. And it's, the gist of it is 10% of your life is action. The other 90% is reaction. And the way that I break it down is 10% happens to you. The other 90 is how you respond. And so my perspective with everything in my life is, hey, I may not have any control over what happens initially, but I can always control my response to what happened to me or happened for me. And that's kind of what comes to mind when I think about perspective.
Fantastic. What happens for me versus what happens to me. Perseverance.
Perseverance, man. I think it's needed for everybody. Adversity has no filter. It doesn't care if you're 6 or, 66. Some people have lived very, very privileged lives and all of a sudden cancer hits, right? So perseverance is needed for everybody. My brother was 12 when he lost his mom. I was 18. So perseverance was needed at different times in our lives, but it's always needed. So don't think you're above needing to persevere through anything.
The final word, and I want to come back to the role of adversity in maturity. So let me remember that. The last word will be partnerships.
Partnerships, man. I think, well, number one, they're needed. They've been huge for me. I shared that the Obama Foundation, supported my book. Different celebrities have, shared my books and things of that nature. But I think mainly when you're a good person and you're genuine, people will want to partner with you, right? If it's all about you 24/7 and people see that and they see that arrogance, not too many people want to partner with you. And you need partnerships to be able to grow in every aspect of your life, whether it's with faith. It's hard to do it alone, right? Community is needed. Whether it's, finances, I don't know everything about it. So I'm trying to learn. My family, there are people that have been married for 40 years that can partner with me and tell me, hey, Chris, make sure you nod and say, yes, ma'am, when she says that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's needed in every aspect of our lives. Partnerships are important.
Can you talk about how adversity has helped you to mature? Because you're a young man. I mean, I'm a young man too, but you're a younger man.
No doubt.
Can you talk about the role of adversity or helping to refine you into who you are? And then also in terms of maturity and your outlook?
Yeah, I'd say, man, I'm 25 right now, but, I think like I'm twice my age, only because, I take care of my brother and sister. My sister's in college, about to graduate. My brother, we just moved him into college on Friday to start at playing baseball at his university. So I think a little bit differently, not because I, want to, it's because I was forced to. At 18, I was taking care, or 19, I was taking care of two teenagers. And there's things that come with that you don't know unless you're doing them. But I didn't know car insurance was mandatory. Like, I didn't know all these different things because I didn't need to know. I was kind of thrown into the fire, and it's either sink or swim. And I'm grateful that God has given me, wisdom. He's given me strength, partnerships to be able to grow in those moments and swim. But it definitely made me think differently, made me mature a lot quicker than other people did. But it's a blessing now thinking about it, man. It's a blessing because, now I know things and I think about things people aren't thinking about for another 15 years, right? So it's almost like I've set myself up for a little bit for more success because I think like people that have been here for 20 years longer than I have. Yep. So I used to look at it like, man, I had to grow up so quickly, but now I see it as an asset.
It's a great asset because your filter is a lot better at an early age than if you had to wait till it was later. And I can only speak for me. I became a no nonsense person in my 20s as well. And, and so I was like, if it wasn't moving me forward, it was not going to be in my wagon. And that's just how I lived. I'm going to give you the last word here before we close the podcast today.
I want to say this real quick. There's only two ways you can go when you lose your mom while she's praying. You can say there's no way God is real, or you can say, God, I need you to get me through this mess. And I went with the latter. And so it would definitely be, I want people to read the book of Proverbs, right? I'm a young man who's gained a lot of, I guess, wisdom and knowledge, but it's not by accident. It's from the most best-selling book of all time, the Bible. And so reading the book of Proverbs, I was given the passage, Proverbs 24:10, and it states, if a man falls in the day of adversity, he's a man of little strength. And I think we've all been equipped with the things we need to get through in life, but don't falter in that day of adversity because it's coming.
Wow. Well, with that, I want to say thank you, and thanks for sharing about your faith, and thank you for being our guest today. And until next time on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, this is David Cooks reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
And so ultimately, like anyone listening to this, just feel like nurture the relationships that you have, grow with them, and don't be afraid just to say, my best friend maybe isn't the same guy that he was 10 years ago. That's okay.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
I'm excited to have John Wilkham on the podcast.
And when I hate the word old, but as you mature in life, relationships are everything. And you want to kind of keep those close to the vest. And if anything's, been realized, I guess, during a pandemic, it's just make a little bit of extra effort to reach out to the people that you care about. And I think ultimately, those are good things for the heart.
Paralysis to purpose.